friends, so far Dr. Bajaj has expanded the area of discussion with reference to the time in which Jack London in America lived, and the situation he faced, and that made him write a specific kind of fiction. And today's lecture is that way on the short fiction that he wrote, and his voice was heard by a large number of people. And in fact, whatever he said in his short stories, depicted in his short stories, projected through his stories, was actually an outcome of his personal experience. This is the impression I get from Dr. Bajaj's presentation. So I now request her to go further into the short stories and tell us about the characters he makes in his short stories, the kind of situation they face, how they interpret. And if that happens, then is there a difference of interpretation between the characters on one side and the author on the other? So these are the questions that I suggest at random, but you can take your own call on this, and tell us about the specific short stories that you think are important for him to discuss, for us to discuss about him.
Right. Thank you, Professor Prakash. Yeah, very rightly you said that these are his personal experiences that become a sort of a perspective in the stories that he then makes characters around this perspective. So I think it's very true that his personal experiences turn into a perspective which then are brought to us in the form of a narrative. So to begin with, actually, Jack London was jailed. I referred to this in my previous lecture, that Jack London was actually jailed for vagrancy and had to spend a month in the Erie County Pen in New York, yeah, in the Buffalo region. Now, the kind of experiences he had over there in living in a prison and the kind of human degradation that he found over there, he found it absolutely, he found that people were dehumanized to the core. And he refers to this in his short story, The Pen, where the story actually recounts the lives of prisoners who constitute this kind of a lumpen group in society. He points out that they are actually a reflection of what is going on in society. So, they are a reflection of the dominant system that prevails in society, which of course is the capitalist system, and he refers to it in the story. But these characters in the prison, the inhabitants of the prisons, they are petty and violent, they are sly and opportunistic, just as the world outside the prison. And the narrator, who's actually the prisoner also, who's one of the inhabitants of prison house, he actually tells us, and I quote, "The whole prison was covered by a network of lines of communication, and we who were in control of the system of communication, naturally, since we were modeled after capitalistic society, exacted heavy tolls from our customers. It was service for profit with a vengeance," unquote. So you can see how he is constantly in this story Pen, he is constantly bringing to us the idea that we are living in capitalism. So we are going to behave like a capitalist society, and just because we are modeled after capitalist society, therefore we are going to take whatever service we provide. If we help somebody in the prison, we will extract our profit with a vengeance.
So that's a critical stance of the writer.
Right. He's being very satiric in this particular story vis-a-vis against capitalism and the system that is there. He said, of course, this is what capitalism tells us: make profit and exploit people, make them believe that this is what they want, and fleece them dry. So,
and he has the critical courage to call the person, call the system, call the trend by name.
Yes, he does. I mean, in absolutely straightforward word, he says that we are modeled after capitalist society. Therefore, we exact heavy tolls from our customers. It was service for profit with a vengeance. So he's not mincing words at all. He's true about his stance, and he's in fact became quite he had this fervor and zeal as a socialist, and he tried to bring them to stories. But what is interesting is that when he projects these characters and he projects the situation of the prison, he's able to see the system at work, and constantly he's making comparisons with the outside world. For instance, how the bread is rationed, how we hoard. There is an instance in the story where he says that we were given a fistful of food. A bread portion was just as big as that of a fist. But there were the hall keepers.
That's a good use of the fistful.
Yeah. And he says that, well, there were hall keepers who had hoarded bread behind. He says that's exactly the system outside. We are
You
made
use
to.
the word lumpen there. Is
Right.
there a connection between the lumpen element in human nature and social nature and capitalism?
You see, he is talking about, for instance, I'll tell you why I use the word lumpen, and I'll use another quote from the story. The narrator talks about what are the kind of people who occupy this place. He says, I quote, "Our hall was a common stews, filled with the ruck and filth, the scum and dregs of society." And then he goes on to explain what are these scum and dregs of society. He calls them hereditary inefficients, degenerates, wrecks, lunatics, adult intelligences, epileptics, monsters, weaklings, in short, a very nightmare of humanity. End quote. So, which is why all groups, so there are people who have been wrongly charged
So he
or
is
something.
pointing a accusing finger at capitalism.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yes. So the lumpen group is not criticized for being a lumpen group, but because they have been driven to become this. So, in this category, he actually puts the weaklings, monsters, the lunatics, and the inefficients, the degenerates all together. So these are the people who are, you could say, it's the underbelly of society in a way. And in one instance he says, well, this person was imprisoned because he tried to steal bread. So because one stole bread, which is again a reference to hunger. Hunger is one of the very important themes in London's works. So hunger drives them to take food, to steal food, and then they are put in these prison houses. And what is more important is that the prison houses actually make them insane. It is the prison houses that make them the dregs and inhuman and dehumanized.
Run and administered by the system.
Exactly. So it is not what they did outside, maybe a part of why they are inside, but this prison house ensures that they are totally broken by the system.
Culprits are hunger and prison houses.
Right. In that sense, yes. And I'm reminded of Foucault for that reason also, because Foucault constantly talks about, how the prison houses are meant to instill fear and break the, psychologically the person. So, and with this kind of panopticon or the gaze, which is constantly there, and how they've been, how they are beaten in the prison house. So, there is an order in the prison house which is enforced, which is actually as bestial as the world of animals. So where no rule prevails and you can play with rules as well. So I think this is what it's the other side of, the person really is not a devil when he enters the prison. He actually becomes a devil while spending time in the prison. So, it's that kind of, they become monsters, even weaklings, so either they are broken or they become monsters living in this system, and which is why he says it's the very nightmare of humanity. So, what this system has done to people is the realization that he has in the prison house, in the pen. And therefore he says, and there's another quote that might actually help us in understanding what he means by the Erie County pen. He says, manhandling was merely one of the minor unprintable horrors of the Erie County pen. I say unprintable, and in justice I must also say unthinkable. So they are manhandled, and it is unthinkable and it is unprintable, the kind of things that are done to prisoners. Unprintable because they're obviously, you cannot even talk about them.
It's disgusting.
Yeah. No, but they're so violent, extreme violence, of the sort that cannot be even written or cannot even be thought. So suggesting that this manhandling is again a way through which these people are dehumanized. That also a system through which they become animals living inside the prison, and then he goes on to, of course, talk about that, I was no spring chicken, but still the kind of abysses of human degradation that I witnessed in this county pen, I cannot even go into the bottom of it. So these are, this is what brings us to an understanding that, that what is the system in society that is active, and what kind of, how it operates and how it affects the people around them. So the pen is a very good urban story of London that projects to us the kind of system that prevails in society, and how it is how it demeans and makes us inhuman, in that sense. On the other hand, his story, the love of life, which is which is completely away from any urban centers. I chose these two stories because I also thought they were very different in way. The love of life is the story which is actually set against the backdrop of the Yukon gold rush that I referred to in my previous lecture about the Canadian gold rush. So it is set against that background of Yukon gold rush, but it has there is no semblance of civilization or urbanity visible anywhere in this story. The pen was the prison house of all these people who were living in there and came from the city, are a product of the capitalist society. But on the other hand, love of life is set against this kind of wilderness, there are just, and the harshness of nature. This story also gives us a view of what London thought was this perpetual conflict between man and nature, that the human being always is undermines the colossal force that nature is, and is obviously made to learn a lesson or two on it. So I think that kind of a conflict is projected again, but again the background remains the same, that is people driven to frenzy to make money, people driven to this kind of a madness to go to the extremes of to mine gold so they can return home rich. So love of life is a story that is set against this background. We find two gold seekers making their journey to Alaska, and there are specific names that are provided to us, such as the Great Bear Lake, or talking about the Mackenzie that they will be crossing, and finally reaching the Alaskan Sea, right, and where the Arctic Circle. So you see, and the Arctic Circle. So the region around that, the Yukon region, where in 1890s a discovery of gold took place, this is the backdrop against which these two gold seekers make their journey to get gold. Now it's very interesting that the protagonist, the person whose central consciousness we follow, is someone who is never named in the story. We never get to know who he is, but we always get to, we know his partner's name, Bill, but we don't know the name of the protagonist. Again, we don't know what has happened to them, where they are returning, but we know they are returning home. They've already taken the gold, that they've already found gold that they were supposed to carry, and they're carrying this gold back home. Right, now they are journeying back home after having procured the sought after gold in the Alaskan region. But the excruciating journey that they make, that it takes a toll on both of them. The harrowing experiences of the protagonist are given to us in minute details. And at the very beginning, we are told that while these two men are crossing rivers, which is almost frozen, as cold as a frozen river, and it is also the onset of winter. They expect winters to take over, and they are trying to get back to the south to be able to evade this kind of a winter spell. But at the very beginning, the protagonist actually sprains his ankle and is abandoned by the partner Bill, who continues his journey. Even when he calls for help from Bill, Bill doesn't look back and he continues the journey. From then on, we find that the protagonist is completely alone and he struggles to carry on. And it is this struggle of his in a state of starvation, when he's starved and he's injured and he's driven to extremity, that actually becomes that becomes endearing for us, because we join the protagonist in the struggle to live. And that is the love of life. He doesn't give up. It's not something that it's not like he's nostalgic about a past life. It's not even that he's looking at some some love that he has left behind. It is pure love of life that makes him not give up. And to the extent that he sucks bones of animals that have already, he doesn't have he doesn't have any means to kill animals because he doesn't have any bullet in his gun, and you know, he's hurt, his ankle is hurt, so he can't even run after animals. So he's left to whatever are the leftovers. So when the wolves have eaten an animal, he only sucks the bones of these animals. He in fact crushes the bones against stones, powders them and gulps them down. So, you know, the kind of extremity and this kind of bestiality gets pronounced more and more in his character. He eats bird chicks alive and whatever hands can grab. You know, he eats minnows, fish, whatever he is able to grab. But steadily he's not able to keep up. He becomes delusional, he's unable to walk, he becomes unconscious of, you know, while on the way, and drops unconscious, then picks up the journey and you know, tries to walk. When he's unable to walk, you know, he's all on his fours and he's crawling to just keep moving, because there is this in his mind, there is this hope that he knows that he should reach a river where they have put their canoe and where there are some supplies which they will find over there. Both Bill and he were supposed to reach that river shore where they will find their canoe and they will sail to south. But it's the journey to reach to that shore that that is most harrowing for the protagonist. Of course, we don't know what happens to Bill throughout the journey, but towards the end, we know that Bill has been eaten by wolves, because the same gold that he was carrying, the protagonist, was also with Bill, and the protagonist finds that a pouch of gold lying, and along with the pouch of gold, a set of bones with wolves footpad. So, you know, there is a sense that their journeys to find gold has been successful, but their journey back it has not been. And this refers to, you know, the kind of extremities that these people had to undertake, you know, the avalanches, etc., that I mentioned, along with attacks from wild animals. So how this character is persevering in this situation, simply because he wants to live, and it's the love of life that keeps him going, while hunger gnaws him and he's just driven mad because of hunger. So all these are, you know, this is the backdrop of the story Love of Life.
The description you have provided of the story, you know, has some very important dimensions, and you suggest that they are there. For instance, the name of the protagonist is not given, you say. It's always he. And
I, in that sense, whenever
yes,
he's talking.
I or he. And then, you know, he's expanded in scope because he's a human being, and a human being who represents maybe all of us. The greed that is there in us, which, you know, compels us to go in a certain direction. And yet he's failing at every moment, at every step. And the more he fails, the more determined he becomes to go forward. So this kind of a thing makes the story rather mythical. And what do you say?
So, you know, I also felt that there was a sense of mysticism attached to it, and mythical, as you say. Also, this gold rush has fed into so much of narrative, and that it has become a sort of a mythical thing. But, you know, what keeps this story realistic is this reference to, you know, he's very strong. Jack London is very strong in his descriptions, very emphatic, in fact. So when he refers to a place, geographically speaking, then, you know, he gives us a series of names that you can place, that are actual places in Canada. You know, the up north, and you can actually trace the river to another river that they plan to take. The geography of the region, the locale, the kind of you know, the kind, say for instance, he says, well, there are no frogs in this region, so he's not going to find any, and there are these berries which are very local berries that are sour but will give him no nutrition. So, you know, you are constantly tied to the locale to such an extent that you actually feel it is a real story. So I think these realistic details of the land of little sticks, he calls them. If one were to go and look up, you'll actually find this land of little sticks in the region. The Great Bear Lake, for instance. So, you know, he's constantly taking names that, oh, it is this region, this river, and I am here. So this, in a way, doesn't let it become that mythical, even though he tries. It is philosophical in turns. You know, the very fact that this story, you know, this story has an epigraph, for instance, where we are given a sense of what what this story is all about. It keeps it away. It mystifies the whole idea of philosophy of life, but then keeps it authentic because of the real life details.
No,
that
I think you have retrieved it from mythicism, because there are rivers which are named, there are trees which are named, there are animals which are named, and all these things show that he's talking about a real scene.
Yes.
And in that real scene, the voice of the human being is suppressed or crushed or whatever, but the human being doesn't say die. He wants to continue.
Yeah, the fact that that he keeps referring to the route that the two travelers had planned and that they were supposed to take, that it will take them to the Hudson Bay post, and the fact that when he is rescued at the end, then he's talking about the whale scientists who keep coming to this shore because of their research. So in a way, these things keep tie them to the realistic base, even when you find that he's often going into a philosophical take on life. For instance, I was referring to the epigraph of this story, and it captures the philosophical mood of the writer, because there it runs as, and I quote, "This out of all will remain. They have lived and have tossed. So much of the game will be gain, though the gold of the dice has been lost." Unquote. Now, you see the whole idea of that they have lived and they have tossed, they have struggled, and the gold will be lost for which they came. All they are going to be left with is the game, will be the gain, will be gain. But the idea that, again, trying to take, again, this also gets connected with the protagonist's, very enlightening moment in the story when he picks up the bone, which is apparently his friend Bill. Because he has been eaten by wolves.
Very gory.
Yeah, very gory. And, all through he has been, because he's not able to, he's so famished and starved that all through, and he doesn't have enough strength to make a kill himself. So he's been just sucking bones, crunching bones. So he has this philosophical, almost Hamlet-like moment where he says, should I crunch this bone of my friend or not? And he decides not to, because he says, well, and what he says at this moment is, and I quote, he says, "Such was life, a vain and fleeting thing. It was only life that pained. There was no hurt in death. To die was to sleep. It meant cessation, rest. Then why was he not content to die?" End quote. Now,
good question.
Yes, he says that if there is no hurt in death, then why don't I cease? Why don't I just stop?
But he will not.
But he will not. He says, then why am I not content to die? There is this scene which is absolutely very full of very insightful. There is a sick wolf that is stalking him, and here is a famished man who is going unconscious at every step. Now, this sick wolf doesn't have the strength to make a kill, and both of them are waiting for one another to die, and the sick wolf actually comes and licks him.
So nature in two forms.
Yeah.
in the form of the wolf and in the form of the human being.
Of the human being, and the third, the harsh, strong winter of the north, where there is snow all over, and it is so cold that he is not able to keep his fire. He is not able to go. So the sick wolf is waiting for him to die so he can have him as his food. And he says, if it were a healthy wolf, I would have still given up, but for this sick thing, I will not become a meat. So how it is a macabre. The story then becomes very macabre.
One question, for instance, about this story, there is so much of place, so much of nature, so much of trees and birds. Would you call it more of a geographical story than a historical story? Because there's not much of history here.
Yes, so that's what I said. It is devoid of people. There is no one else. This protagonist who had a partner in the beginning has gone away. He's all alone, a solitary being, trying to struggle against all odds, whether they are the odds of nature or animal attacks that he meets. So, he's constantly trying out this dynamic, which is the human-animal dynamic, where, and the very basic fact that it is the struggle and it is this fear through which he becomes courageous. He actually stands up against a bear.
In 2 sentences, how would you sum it up, the discussion?
I think the story is actually about how environment can make can bring the most primitive aspects of you out. At the same time, it is about the instinct of survival. that when it comes to the basic instinct of survival, when you're when you're faced with this problem, then you fight it out. And you fight it out not as a civilized human being, but as a primordial sort of a creature, and you will do everything. So towards the end, there is no difference between that wolf and that human being. They both behave in the same manner. In fact, when he is rescued, the people on the ship can't see that this is a human being. They said there is something, that is a creature that is walking to them, and they don't, on all fours, literally on fours, and they don't know whether this can't be a human being. So human beings stripped of all civilization, stripped of all of whatever progress has been made, and reduced to that basic human instinct.
So friends, we have had a very lively discussion on Jack London, who showed different aspects of life in the early part of the 20th century, and I hope you have gained a lot about America at that time and the writer's attitude, that writer who was called Jack London. Thank you.